Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and this is Voice of the Global South. All right then, let's get started on the show this week. A global health emergency is declared as a rare, deadly Ebola strain spreads silently through Africa. With zero vaccines or treatments, hundreds of suspected cases are already emerging as a single hidden outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo puts the entire world on notice. 42 highly advanced US aircraft destroyed or damaged in just 40 days of the Iran war. And the biggest shock, the invisible F-35 stealth fighter was finally hit. Iran claims to have shattered American air power. And now a new US report reveals that Tehran might be right. And no fuel, no food, complete chaos in the streets. Bolivia is facing an unprecedented national emergency after ending its fuel subsidies. With 4 dead, major transport strikes, and former President Evo Morales is fueling a popular insurrection from the shadows, the government of President Rodrigo Paz is scrambling to survive. We tell you how a gas crisis sparked a political war. A deadly Ebola outbreak has once again emerged in Africa, triggering alarm around the world. The virus has already claimed more than 150 lives in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and is now spreading into neighboring Uganda. As Aman Kumar Himanshu and Adamya Mishra report, the crisis highlights how quickly deadly diseases can spread when health systems and surveillance weaken.
Beyond the confirmed cases, there are almost 600 suspected cases and 139 suspected deaths. We expect those numbers to keep increasing, given the amount of time the virus was circulating before the outbreak was detected.
A dire warning from the World Health Organization. The speed and scale of the outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and neighboring Uganda have raised the threat. On 16th May, the WHO officially declared the Ebola outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. This designation represents the highest level of global health alert reserved for outbreaks that pose a serious risk beyond the borders of the country where they originated. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has battled Ebola more than any other country in the world. This latest outbreak marks the country's 17th since the virus was first identified there in 1976. The DRC has seen an average of 1 Ebola outbreak every 3 years. The new outbreak comes just 5 months after the country declared its previous Ebola epidemic over. The current outbreak represents a critical global health crisis, primarily due to the rapid transmission of the rare Bundibugyo virus strain. This outbreak is particularly alarming because it involves a viral species for which there are currently no approved vaccines or treatments. The most alarming aspect of the current Ebola outbreak is not just the virus itself, but how far it had already spread before authorities recognized the threat. For weeks, the disease moved silently through eastern Congo unnoticed. The first suspected case appeared on 24th April when a health worker in Bunia developed fever and hemorrhaging symptoms before dying shortly afterwards. His body was transported to the densely populated mining town of Mongwalu, a step experts believe helped accelerate the outbreak. In the weeks that followed, the disease continued to move silently from person to person. Early tests failed to detect the infection because doctors were searching for the more common Zaire strain of Ebola, while symptoms were mistaken for other illnesses. The scale of the crisis only became clear on 5th May when reports of dozens of unexplained deaths surfaced on social media. By then, nearly 50 people had already died in the Mongwalu and Rawampara health zones. Laboratory tests finally confirmed the presence of the rare Bondiboju strain on 14th May. Scientists believe that the outbreak likely began with a spillover event, where the virus jumped from an animal to a human before rapidly spreading through close contact. Congolese authorities insist that teams are working hard to contain the strain of Ebola.
I'm afraid of bringing the disease home to my family because I spend the whole day transporting people. I'm afraid of dying. That is what scares me so much.
Ebola is a rare but deadly viral disease that usually originates in animals, particularly fruit bats. Human outbreaks often begin when people come into contact with or consume infected animals. Symptoms can appear anywhere between 2 and 21 days after infection, beginning suddenly with fever, headache, body pain, and extreme fatigue, much like the flu. As the illness worsens, patients may develop vomiting, diarrhea, and severe organ damage. In some cases, internal and external bleeding also occurs. Ebola remains one of the world's deadliest diseases, with this strain carrying a fatality rate of 30% to 50% even with medical care. In remote areas with limited treatment facilities, the risk of death can be even higher. Experts are working on several vaccine candidates for Bondiboju, including an mRNA vaccine, but they aren't available yet. The WHO says it could take up to 9 months before a vaccine against this particular species of Ebola is ready.
There is a RSV Bundibugyo vaccine. So this would be the equivalent of Ervebo, which would be specific for Bundibugyo. There are no doses of this which are currently available for clinical trial. So this needs to be prioritized as the most promising Bundibugyo candidate vaccine. The information that we have is that this is likely to take 6 to 9 months.
The WHO says that the Ebola outbreak linked to more than 130 deaths in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo likely started 2 months ago and is expected to continue to grow.
Investigations are ongoing to ascertain when and where exactly this outbreak started. Given the scale, we are thinking that it has started probably a couple of months ago, but investigations are ongoing.
But how is that Ebola always returns to the DRC? In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ebola never truly disappears. Deep inside the country's vast rainforests, the virus survives in animals such as bats and primates, creating constant risks of new outbreaks. As forests are cleared for farming, mining, and hunting, people come into closer contact with these animals, increasing the chances of the virus jumping from wildlife to humans. But nature is only part of the problem. Many Ebola outbreaks emerge in regions torn apart by armed conflict, where violence has weakened hospitals, disrupted health services, and forced thousands of families from their homes. In overcrowded camps and unstable communities, diseases can spread rapidly before authorities are able to respond. Together, the deadly mix of environmental exposure, conflict, and fragile healthcare systems have made the DRC one of the world's most vulnerable countries to recurring Ebola outbreaks. The WHO has asked the DRC government to screen people leaving from its international airports, seaports, and major land crossings for unexplained febrile illness consistent with potential Bondiboju virus disease. While in Uganda, people have been told to avoid hugging and holding hands, and the country's annual Uganda Martyrs' Day celebrations on 3rd June, which usually involve millions of people gathering, has been cancelled. For now, health officials report the situation to be concerning yet under control. Emergency teams are expanding treatment and vaccination efforts in affected areas. As global agencies step up support, there's a hope that fast action and better coordination can help prevent a major health crisis. With camera person Rajendra, this is Adamya Mishra for DD India.
And now to a sobering reality check for the US military in its war against Iran. A newly declassified US report reveals the staggering toll of the Trump government's air campaign against Iran. And it's making headlines everywhere, from newspapers published in India and the United States to television networks and YouTubers.
A new report from the United States Congress has revealed the war in Iran has cost the US military $29 billion so far. This includes $300 million on fighter jets, which were downed by friendly fire.
Trump said Iran has nothing. Trump said their radar is annihilated. Trump said their air force is destroyed. Trump said America controls the skies. Then America lost 42 aircraft.
The Defense Department estimated the total cost of the losses is $2.6 billion.
Get this, during Operation Epic Fury, which was launched on 28 February, the US military lost or suffered severe damage to at least 42 aircraft. It's cost the US a cool $2.6 billion, pushing the total cost of the Iran war to a stunning $29 billion.
The Iran war had cost $25 billion in total. You reaffirmed that today. Do you have any other updated costs or projections?
So at the time of testimony in front of the House, it was $25 billion. But the Joint Staff team and the Comptroller team are constantly looking at that estimate. And so now we think it's closer to 29.
Here's a closer look at what came down. Now, for decades, the US has operated under the assumption of absolute, unchallenged air superiority. This report breaks that illusion. The wreckage spans across the entire spectrum of the US fleet of aircraft. 24 MQ-9 Reaper drones, the absolute workhorse of US surveillance and targeted strikes. 7 KC-135 Stratotankers, the vital aerial refueling lifelines. 4 F-15E Strike Eagle fighter jets. 2 MC-130J transport planes, which the US intentionally destroyed on the ground in Iran after they could not take off. 1 Triton surveillance drone. And the big headline maker, an F-35A Lightning II stealth fighter listed as combat damaged. Now, some of these planes were blown out of the sky by surface-to-air missiles. Others were sitting ducks on the tarmac during Iranian ballistic missile counterattacks on US bases in the region. Now, I should add here that the report released on 13th May is based on a compilation of statements made by the Department of War and news reports. The US government has not released its own official combat loss assessment. But to truly understand why Washington, D.C. is buzzing over these 42 aircraft, you have to put this number into historical perspective. The US has simply not seen an aviation attrition rate like this in its modern history. In the 1991 Gulf War, the US lost more planes, but that was because they were flying against thousands of Soviet-era Iraqi assets in a massive theater-wide conventional war. In the decades since, including the 2001 war in Afghanistan and the 2003 war in Iraq, the US Air Force operated with virtually zero threat from the ground. And therefore, losing 42 highly advanced multi-million-dollar platforms in just over a single month against Iran signals that the era of easy air supremacy is officially over. Now, you've got to understand something here. The F-35A Lightning II is an $80 million piece of cutting-edge technology designed explicitly to be invisible to enemy radar and survive the world's most hostile air defense networks. Before this conflict, an F-35 had never, ever been downed in combat. Yes, F-35 variants have seen combat action with Israeli and US forces in Syria, Gaza and Yemen since 2018, but none had ever been verified as damaged or downed by an enemy. Now, the fog of war in Iran has changed the narrative. Now, back in March, reports surfaced of an F-35A making an emergency landing at a regional base with shrapnel wounds after taking ground fire. Now, the latest US report publicly validates that an F-35A was indeed damaged. And Tehran has pounced on this admission. Iran's foreign minister Syed Abbas Araghchi took to social media to brag, claiming vindication and saying that Iran is officially the first country to strike down the F-35. He wrote, "Our powerful armed forces are confirmed as first to strike down a touted F-35. So what does this tell us about Iran's true military capabilities? Military analysts say that it proves two things. One, Iran possesses a highly dense, deeply adaptive air defense network. It isn't just relying on older Russian systems. It has successfully deployed indigenous, highly capable surface-to-air systems and electronic warfare units. Two, modern war has evolved. You don't need a massive air force to deny your enemy the skies. Precision ballistic missiles, loitering munitions, and swarm drones can cripple an advanced military by striking their infrastructure on the ground. The warning from Tehran is clear. Minister Araghchi wrote on X that if military action resumes, Washington, D.C. will face, quote, many more surprises. Now, all of this raises serious questions for U.S. lawmakers about strategy, risk assessment, the resilience of U.S. high-tech arsenal, and the long-term sustainability of air operations against a determined adversary with modern air defenses. Now, some U.S. lawmakers are asking whether the U.S. campaign's intensity and exposure of high-value assets were necessary, or if lessons from drone-heavy standoff warfare could reduce future risks. A fierce debate is underway among U.S. lawmakers over whether the Trump government underestimated its adversary. One lawmaker even questions the success of Operation Midnight Hammer, a massive, highly coordinated U.S. military strike executed in June 2025 that targeted and disabled 3 critical nuclear facilities inside Iran.
We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of
missiles. So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before.
And public opinion is hardening too. A newly released poll indicates that 64% of U.S. citizens believe that starting the Iran war was the wrong decision. Now, this puts severe political pressure on President Donald Trump as a fragile truce hangs in the balance. Bolivia is boiling. The South American country is facing its worst unrest in decades as protests over fuel shortages, rising prices, and economic reforms intensify. Once a major South American natural gas producer, Bolivia is now facing one of the most severe crises in its 200-year history, with the economy hit hard by a lack of investment in the oil and gas sector and the fallout from political decisions. Bolivia's President Rodrigo Paz says that he will reshuffle his cabinet to pacify protesters, but will it be enough? Aman Kumar Himanshu reports.
streets of Bolivia's capital, La Paz, resembled a battleground. Protesters blocked roads, set off dynamite, and riot police fired tear gas. As Bolivia sinks deeper into its worst political crisis in decades, the unrest escalated sharply over the past 2 weeks. At least 4 deaths were reported, including 3 people who were unable to reach a hospital for urgent medical treatment because of the roadblocks. The disruptions emptied out food markets, interrupted fuel distribution, and caused shortages of essential medical supplies, including oxygen for hospitals. More than 3,000 security personnel were deployed to clear the roads. But the protest movement continues to grow. Argentina sent a military aircraft with food supplies at Bolivia's request. Protesters demanded that President Rodrigo Paz's government roll back austerity measures and address rising living costs, with some even calling for his resignation. The protests centered on rising economic pressures. Teachers demanded higher pay and more funding, while transport unions launched open-ended strikes amid fuel shortages and supply concerns. Indigenous and rural groups opposed agrarian reforms, which they said favor large landowners. Paz Pirera, the son of former President J.P. Zamora, who governed from 1989 to 1993, took office, promising an economic shock therapy, but conditions have not improved, and some of his measures have proved deeply unpopular. One of his biggest moves was ending Bolivia's 20-year fuel subsidy program. He argued that a free market would improve fuel supply and quality. But instead of relief, the country was hit by continuing shortages and a scandal involving adulterated junk fuel that transport workers said damaged thousands of vehicles. Protesters accused the government of pushing neoliberal policies that favored big businesses and foreign interests, while ordinary Bolivians struggled with rising living costs. The crisis triggered a wave of protests led by powerful labor unions demanding higher wages, reliable fuel supplies, and President Paz's resignation. For a government already reduced to a minority in the country's parliament, the unrest revived political momentum behind former President Evo Morales and his supporters. Amid weeks of resignation demands, Bolivia's President Paz on Thursday said that he will reorganize his cabinet.
And from the government, I want to announce that we are not only going to carry out a reshuffle of the cabinet, because we have to reshuffle a cabinet that has to have a capacity to listen. The president cannot be everywhere. We are forming the Economic and Social Council, where we are going to call on all those who want to participate in the government to build a joint government.
But why everyone is so angry at the president? For nearly 2 decades, Bolivia was governed by the left-wing Movement Towards Socialism party that expanded political power for indigenous communities, rural farmers, and working-class groups through broad social programs. But economic decline and growing divisions inside the party led many voters to seek change. In last year's election, Rodrigo Paz campaigned as a moderate alternative, promising stability and reform. Since taking office, however, Paz has disappointed many of the same voters who helped elect him. His government was criticized for favoring conservative business interests after he filled key cabinet positions with business leaders while leaving indigenous labor and farming sectors largely excluded from power. Tensions peaked on Monday when supporters of former President Evo Morales clashed with police in La Paz while joining broader demonstrations demanding Paz's resignation. Morales still commands enormous influence despite facing an arrest warrant over allegations of human trafficking and statutory rape. The government accuses Morales of fomenting the unrest to evade trial, while Morales maintains that the protests are a necessary response to a system that views indigenous people and workers as savages. Morales served as Bolivia's first indigenous president from 2006 to 2019. He fundamentally reshaped the country by sharply reducing poverty before a disputed bid for a 4th term that forced him into temporary exile. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau claimed that the protests were an ongoing coup d'etat. The US threw its support behind pause, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio reaffirming Washington, D.C.'s backing for Bolivia's constitutional order. The crisis is now spilling beyond Bolivia's borders and exposing divisions across South America. Tensions with Colombia escalated after Colombian President Gustavo Petro described the unrest as a popular insurrection against political and economic elites. Bolivia responded by expelling Colombia's ambassador and deepening the regional diplomatic rift. With Aman Kumar Himanshu, Tanvi Taneja for DD India.
And with that, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.